This story here with Tucker Carlson, I guess Tucker Carlson is on a podcast tour. He was recently on Breaking Points and he had a conversation with Saagar about free speech. And I want to get into that discussion here. Let's go ahead and bring that in. Boopity boop.
I think one of the things
it's true.
What a lot of people want to hear from you, I think, is that you played the game at the highest level. And so are all of our suspicions true about what's being told to people in the anchor chair, about what you can say, about what you can't say, about commercial impact, about the pressure in the cooker situation as to what's being controlled that people are seeing?
You know, I really should write a book on this, if not that anyone would read it, but just to sort of work out my own thoughts about it. You know, again, when you're working in a business that's that regimented, you know, to show every night at exactly the same time, you can't be late. You know, it's like your whole life, and I wrote my script, so my whole life was about writing my script. Like, that's kind of all I did. So I was telling you that to admit that I missed a lot. I personally, because this was not my first show, it was like my 8th show, that I'd had over the course of my life. I made a very clear deal with my employer out loud and just said, look, I'm not going to be told what to say or think, period. It's not my company. If you don't like what I'm saying, take me off the air. But I'm not going to sort of say or not say something because that would violate my conscience, and I can't do that. So, and they agreed, to their great credit. And then at the end, they exercised their option and pulled the plug, which was their prerogative. And I wasn't really mad. I was confused, but I wasn't mad about it, and I'm not mad now. So I'm not really sure, but I will say, looking back on it, the Ukraine war and the vax, and to some extent January 6th, on which I think I've been fundamentally vindicated, and I had out-of-step views on all 3 things, but 2 of them were absolutely, you know, were red lines, like you couldn't go there. And I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, I think for different reasons. The vax, because obviously the pharma companies are the biggest advertiser in media. They don't advertise to sell their products. You're not, you know, people aren't buying mostly, you know, they can't buy.
Let me pause here for a second. You know what was interesting about this is he said like certain areas he could not go, or he was not supposed to go there in reference to mainstream media. What's interesting is that you can't go there on YouTube either. That's the thing. Like I just thinking about that, like, it's not just about what you can't say on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC. Yes, don't get me wrong. Mainstream media has a narrative and it's usually the same or close to what the State Department has, right? But also you can't go there on YouTube either. So what does that tell you?
Buy them directly. So why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that not to sell the product, but to influence the coverage of the product. And that's very effective. So I crossed that line in a big way because I thought the vax was dangerous, and it turns out it was. And then on Ukraine, it's like every single person in the top 1% for income and influence, like literally almost every single person heard this weird frequency, this dog whistle that commanded them to worship Zelensky. And I'm not exactly sure what that was. I looked at Zelensky and I'm like, that guy's really bad. Yes. He wants to get my country involved in a nuclear war. And, you know, I don't know him. So I'm not attacking him personally, but anyone who wants my kids to risk death in a nuclear war is my enemy. It was just kind of that simple. So I was like, this guy's evil to the extent that he's acting against my children's interests. And saying that was like, oh my gosh, it was like a bomb going off. Like people couldn't even deal with it. And I'm not quite sure what that was, other than everybody in Aspen, Nantucket, Jackson, and Bethesda was like all in on this thing. And someday historians will discover why. I really don't know, but that fact is true.
That's such an important point. And this is another thing too, I've always respected them most is, you know, to a certain extent, I rejected the system early on, but you came up in it and you also openly gave them the middle finger, even while growing up next to them, living next to them for years. Yeah. I've watched it with Ukraine and I watch it now with Israel. You know, I watched in particular, there was a lot of consternation around some comments you made, I think by Ben Shapiro and other, where you were like, well, I've never seen this level of care about Americans who are dying of fentanyl, which I think is a traditional nationalist message. And yet I've watched the entire kind of right-wing ecosystem get embroiled in fundamentally what is a third world conflict. Now we can say support, you know, not support, we can have criticisms, et cetera, of that. that. But what explains this like literal allegiance to narrative on Ukraine, on Israel? Why is it that so many of these people don't seem to have the same level of care for actual American citizens?
So Saagar is being disingenuous with this question. And let me explain why. Saagar was a part of the Hudson Institute think tank, right? Like Saagar knows the answer to this question. He knows that the military industrial complex controls our politicians. He knows that they also control the media, the State Department. Like all this is wrapped up into one thing. So Saagar knows this. He knows the answer to this question. And it's not even so much about that people don't think about America first. It's about the donors and the billionaire class that actually control the way that things work in this country are the ones who have the first and final say so. That's just how it is. You may sit back and believe and say, yes, I believe in America first, but all it takes is for a donor to come your way. And a lot of these politicians just sell out altogether. But the thing is, Saagar knows that. Let's continue.
You know, I find it really distressing. And in both of those conflicts, I approached it with a clean conscience because I just don't have strong feelings one way or the other. And I'm not hostile. I've never hated Ukraine. I don't have any feelings about Ukraine. And Russia, same thing. I've never been to either place, and I'm not invested emotionally. So I could just look at it from an American perspective. In the case of Israel and the Arab world, I've spent a fair amount of time in both, and I like both. And I felt terrible for the people who were killed on October 7th. I still do. So I had no weird motive. I was just like thinking about it from an American perspective. Is this good for us or is it not? And I was just amazed by the intolerance and the willingness to immediately go to invective and character assassination. And it's like, I said, first of all, if the people who live in Gaza who are being moved out are so evil and dangerous.
Let's pause. We're going to get into this conversation. Let's pause for a second. So this is where what was interesting to me about this conversation is like, I don't think Tucker Carlson was shot. I felt like Tucker also was being disingenuous with this part. The fact that he was surprised that he got pushback. Of all the years of, especially these two in particular, working in media, they've been there a lot longer than I have. I'm still fairly new. They know when it comes to the state of Israel, they know. They know that AIPAC controls a lot of these politicians. They know about J Street. They know about the Israeli lobby. So they know that if you give some type of criticism towards the state of Israel, they know people come for your head. They know that. You can't tell me. Come on now. You guys know that. And you're a lot of you are not on media, right? Now listen to this part that he says.
That they can't live in the region. Why would you want them to move into?
Oh, this part right here. Yeah. Because see, Tucker doesn't push back here. Pay attention.
And I felt terrible for the people who were killed on October 7th. I still do. So I had no weird motive. I was just like thinking about it from an American perspective. Is this good for us or is it not? And I was just amazed by the intolerance and the willingness to immediately go to invective and character assassination. And it's like, I said, first of all, if the people who live in Gaza who are being moved out are so evil and dangerous that they can't live in the region, why would you want them to move into my country?
Pause. So let me tell you what he just did there. He gave the same talking point that Ron DeSantis gave. If the people in Gaza are that dangerous and evil, why would I want them moved into my country? First of all, there is Hamas and there's the Palestinian people. The majority of the Palestinian people are not Hamas. So again, we have to be very careful about the rhetoric, because what that says, that's basically saying to the Palestinian people, we don't want you here. And what was interesting to me is that some of the same people who said that, I don't know if Tucker feels this way, but some of the same people that said that they didn't want the Palestinian people to come here, like Ron DeSantis, they were totally fine with Ukrainians coming here. They were totally fine with it. They said, bring them on over. You had historical Black college, Hampton University, offering free tuition, room and board for Ukrainian refugees when this war kicked off, boo. People need to understand this. Need to understand it. And don't come back and tell me. Don't come back and even tell me it's like, oh, well, you know what he meant. No, I don't. I know what people say. And people need to pay close attention. So you've seen people do that. And I know you guys have seen people say that same thing. They'll say, oh, they don't want the Palestinians coming here because they're basically saying that the Palestinian people are Hamas, and that is not true, right? If you thought about the Christian religion, and let's say you had a group of Christian extremists, the ones that go around and they decide to blow up abortion clinics, are you them? No. But a lot of these people were totally fine when they said, oh, yes, let the Ukrainians come here. Let's continue.
I mean, what are you saying? They can't live there because it's too scary to live next to them, but they can live next to me? So I at that point, I felt very hostile about that because it showed such contempt for me and my family and my neighbors and my country. It is my country. That's how I feel.
No, this issue is totally wrong. So this is where I felt like Saagar should have pushed back, and he didn't push back. And I think the reason he didn't push back is because, if there would have been pushback on this, he probably wouldn't have gotten this interview. Let's just keep it real. But the thing is this. The reason why the other countries like Egypt, are not opening the border to let the Palestinian people in is not because they think that they are dangerous. They have gone on record talking about this. It is because they know what Israel is trying to do. They know that Israel is trying to push the people out. And by the way, if Egypt were to open their doors and say, come on over here, the state of Israel, Netanyahu, would not let those people return back to Gaza. They would not be allowed to come back. Egypt knows this. That's why they're not opening up their borders. Jordan is aware of this. The Queen of Jordan discussed this on CNN. That is why they are not letting them come in, not because they think that they are dangerous. And Saagar really should have pushed back on that rhetoric. And I got to push back there because I don't want people watching this show thinking that Palestinians are dangerous people. Let's continue.
Feel about it anyway. It's all of our country. And so I was like disgusted by that. And I said so. And I don't know why that's weird. Why wouldn't I be offended by that? And then it was immediately, I'm a hater or a bigot or something like that. None of that registered with me because, first of all, I've been attacked for so long, but attacks that aren't true, if somebody said, wow, you've gained some weight this summer, I'd be like, oh, it would hurt my feelings because it's true. But if someone's like, oh, you're a hater or you hate, that's not true. So I don't really care. But I did think it showed like the level of not just corruption, which I knew, but of like emotional instability and craziness. I mean, there are people, and I stopped reading any of it, but there are people on the right who have spent the last 2 months every single day focused on a conflict in a foreign country as our own country becomes dangerously unstable on the brink of financial collapse with tens of millions of people who shouldn't be here in the country. We don't know their identities or the purpose of their being here. Like stuff that's could destroy the country for real and make it impossible for my kids to live here. They've said nothing about that, and they're focused with laser intensity on foreign conflicts. And I'm like, at some point, I've got 4 kids. If I'm so caught up in the problems of my neighbor's children and completely ignoring my own children as they get addicted to drugs and kill themselves, I'm not.
We got to pause here for just a second because I got to chime in for a second. I want you guys to pay attention to dog whistles, okay? Because first of all, let's be clear. And I think most of you watching this can understand at least this perspective. Tucker Carlson is rich. When he talks about it may be impossible for his kids to live, his kids will be fine. He's rich. I'm not, and most of you are not. When you talk about like whether or not this country will be possible for certain people to live here, people who have money will be fine. The people who will not be fine are those who are working class and those who are poor. It just is what it is. Like, I got to call it out. He'll be all right. He was a Swanson.
Against helping my neighbor's kids, but clearly I don't love my kids. I mean, that's that's the only logical conclusion. And they don't care about the country at all. And that's kind of their prerogative. But I do, because I have no choice, because I'm from here. My family's been here hundreds of years. I plan to stay here. Like, I'm shocked by how little they care about the country, and including the person you mentioned. And I can't imagine how someone like that could get an audience of people who claim to care about America, because he doesn't, obviously, right?
Right. Well, I mean, Tucker, we've seen it too on free speech. I mean, people who've become multimillionaires, who've made entire careers, who've literally became famous, on this very reason. I know you've spoken about this previously, but it's very important to our audience as well. Is that standing up for free speech rights of people you disagree with is probably the most important exercise, and we've seen some of that come for American citizens on Palestine. How do you work through this too, when we're both under such immense pressure, even social pressure, of like, how could you support this? Take maybe the context of the university presidents. We've got billionaires like Bill Ackman, I'm curious what you make of this. My assessment is they're upset that they're not included as marginalized within the DEI regime.
Let me pause here for a second. Margatina says he is not totally wrong here. My cousins in Chicago are only focused on local issues / migrants. I understand that, Margatina, but are your cousins in Chicago millionaires? See, that's the thing. Tucker will be fine.
Claim to be against the DEI regime. But will you really keep going to make sure that all this racial hatred and all this other that's been enshrined in elite institutions will be, once you get a win, are you really going to keep going past that? What's your assessment of this general moment on Palestinian, free speech hypocrisy and more?
Well, we have free speech in this country, and it applies to people we disagree with by definition. Period. I mean, it's the first right guaranteed that, of course, it precedes government. It's given to us by God, as the document says. But it's the first right enumerated in our founding documents. So it's the foundation of the country. And so you can't give any ground on that, like none. And anyone who would give ground on that, and I would include the governor of Florida, who I think is a good governor, and I like him personally, but signing a censorship bill is completely unacceptable. And I don't care what your motives are. I mean, this spring, there was some black nationalist group that was indicted by the Biden Justice Department.
So that's the African Socialist People's Party that he's referring to. That's Amali Yeshitela, Chairman Amali Yeshitela, who's the chairman of that group. I've interviewed him on this show multiple times. That's the group that he's referring to. Actually, it was that segment, I believe, that he did. And it was honestly, I feel like a couple days after that when he was removed from Fox News.
For its views on Russia. And my first thought was, that's not acceptable. Now, how much do I have in common with the black nationalist group that I guess probably hates people who look like me? Actually, I probably 100% chance I'd like him if I had dinner with him. To be honest, I'm sure they're really good guys. I mean, I just want to
interject here as well, because obviously Saagar, remind me, guys, and let me know, did Breaking Points have Amali Yeshitela on? I don't know if they did. Maybe they did. Let me know in the chat. But I actually spoke to Amali Yeshitela multiple times on the show. And I do just want to correct something here, because I don't want people to hear what he just said and run with it. First of all, the African Socialist People's Party do not hate white people. So there's that. They don't hate people that look like him. So I did just want to interject there to make that statement. And what's up, Danny? Happy New Year to you too. Thank you.
Feel that, but whatever. It was irrelevant to me. You can't do that. You can't try to put people in prison for expressing opinions the government doesn't like, or the ruling class doesn't like, or any opinion. Any opinion must be protected, or no opinions are protected. So anybody who seeks to limit my ability to say what I think, believe what I want, is treating me as a slave. I mean, not as a human being, and certainly not as a citizen. That's just really clear. And I don't know why people don't grasp this. But one sort of parenthetical, ironic note, to see people who spent a career mocking the sensitive liberals on campus who want safe spaces, and they're, feeling in danger because opinions are violence, say that exact same thing. People feel unsafe. What? No. You know, words are not violence. You have to tolerate them in a free society, or it's not a free society. As to the question of DEI, the whole thing is Jim Crow. I mean, it's grotesque. The idea.
Let me pause here. See, I was with them there for a minute in reference to the censorship issue. He's correct. Like the first part that he said here, when he talks about how people say that they feel unsafe. So this is another thing that has come up when I used to work at universities as well. Like, it honestly had gotten to the point where someone could say something to you, not threatening. Like, obviously, if someone is threatening to cause physical harm to you, that's one thing. But someone could just say something like, on accident, maybe they called you someone else's name or whatever. All this kind of stuff that come up over the years. And it's like, you could basically just say, I feel threatened by this person. Just like what you see is happening now, the college campuses, where some of the students, some of the Jewish students have come forward and they said that they don't feel safe because of the protests that were happening. And they said they're calling for the end of all Jewish people. That is not what those protests were calling for. I've covered those protests. I've been at those protests. So it has reached this point to where what can you say and what can't you say? And how can you say it? And this is where you get into a dangerous territory, right? Because actually, someone on a college campus can say that you made them feel unsafe, and you may not have said anything that was threatening to them at all, but because they have that right to do so, you see how this can go and where people can take this. Now he gets into this part about DEI. I'm gonna let him finish what he's saying, but I'm explaining to you why that exists in the first place.
That certain people on the basis of immutable characteristics get certain privileges and other people are hurt on the basis of their immutable characteristics, like that's totally incompatible with America. It's got to be a colorblind meritocracy or it can't keep going because it's a pluralistic society.
Let's talk about being colorblind, right? So when I was growing up, I remember have you ever I don't know, have any of you ever had like that one friend and it's like, somewhere along the way, the conversation of race would come up and they would say, I don't see color at all. And, I had to say to a friend of mine one time, a couple years ago, I was like, you don't have to tell me that. You don't have to come to me and say that you don't see color. I don't know if you feel like that's supposed to make me feel better or comfortable around you. You don't have to say that. Because the reality is, you do see color. Everyone sees color. Stop it with the I don't see color shit. Everybody sees color. All of you guys saw the color of my hair tonight when I put up the pictures and asked you, which one should I do? Brown or blonde? We all see color. So let's stop pretending that we don't. Now, that being said, why does DEI exist? I can speak about it from the university perspective, okay? Some of you can speak about it from the corporate perspective. I'm going to talk about the university perspective. The reason why it exists, especially at predominantly white academic institutions, is because along the way, we'll talk about the hiring side, then we'll talk about the student side. When it came to the hiring side, what they found is that particularly some of the hiring managers, we'll say a lot of the hiring managers who were usually white, would hire people that looked like them and would overlook people that had the credentials and the qualifications, but did not look like them. I saw this at the university with faculty searches where obviously here in Boston, most of the college years are predominantly white. I saw it at MIT, although MIT was probably better than some of the other ones. Boston University was terrible, just terrible. Because no matter what department you worked in, mostly when it came to the faculty, most of the faculty members were white. They always had one black faculty member. That was their diversity, right? But typically that's how it was. So what would happen is when you would have faculty searches, it's like they would bring in people from across the country to interview for these positions, especially if it's a tenure track position. They're picky. And they would totally overlook qualified candidates because they did not look like them. I kid you not. And so this was something that was proven throughout the university system, is that these hiring managers, and especially the faculty members, they would only hire people that looked like them. And it's not even necessarily to say that they were doing it on purpose. Sometimes it was subconscious, because the reality is a lot of times you pick someone that looked like you. There was a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting at the Table in the Cafeteria, or sitting together in the cafeteria, right? Because that's what happens a lot of times. You walk into the lunchroom, you're in school. What do people usually do? They usually go towards the tables where people look like them. So the reason why the DEI was put in place, particularly at the universities, was because there were people that were very talented that were being overlooked, especially when it came to management positions and faculty positions, just because they didn't look like the people that were making the hiring decisions. That's why it exists. Hiring side, student side. The reason why it exists on the student side in reference to universities is because when it came to admissions, and I've been on admissions boards, when it came to admissions, a lot of times, again, if you go into a room with an admission committee, most of the time at these elite institutions, everybody looked the same. So they were the ones that were actually deciding which students we should accept into this program. This becomes worse when you get to the competitive PhD programs, by the way. So what would happen is they would admit people that look like them. That's why the DEI was in place in the first place. So if Tucker wants a colorblind society, you have to change people's biases. You have to change their bias, and you have to educate people about just accepting people based on their merit and their skill, and not based on what they look like. And we have not reached that point in this country yet. It's 2023. We still haven't gotten there. That's why it exists. Let's continue.
There's no majority of anything that has, anything in common. So to keep the country together, it has to be based on merit. I mean, game this out. And also, by the way, we're going to get to violence really soon if this stuff continues. Right. If you tell people that this group or that group is bad because they're in that group, because they look a certain way or because their parents looked a certain way, if you tell them that over time, that group's going to get hurt.
But that's exactly what we do in this country. That's a problem. That's exactly what people are doing in reference to the Palestinian people. That's exactly what we do in this country right now. That's the problem. Let's continue.
We don't need to guess about this. Well, actually, it happened in Europe not that long ago, but it's happened throughout history. So why are we tolerating this even for a second? And the reason, of course, is white guilt and self-hatred. Well, whatever. Get over it. It's not about white people. It's not about any specific group. It's about the country. The country can't continue if we allow this to continue. So I think DEI is, people say, well, you don't like it because you're white. It hurts you or whatever. Well, okay, but yeah, sure. But that's kind of not the point. I wouldn't like it if it was aimed at Filipinos. And I would be every bit as loud about it. Like, why would I like that? It's totally immoral. It's the thing we said we hated, Jim Crow, and the Nuremberg laws. I mean, name it. It's the original sin of man, attacking people on the basis of things that they can't control. They were born with. Like, you can't do that, period.
But you can do that, Tucker. See, this is the thing. You can do that. That happens in this country all the time, where people are attacked based on how they were born, whether it's the color of their skin, whether it's how much money their parents make, what neighborhood they grew up in, their zip code. That's another big one. It happens all the time. So for Tucker Carlson to sit up there and say that DEI is Jim Crow were actual laws that put Black people at the bottom. And I told you this before, and you guys can look this up. A recent report came out. When it comes to net worth in this country, Black people are still at the bottom. So I think what people like, and with Saagar, I don't know, man. Saagar, I feel like Saagar doesn't push back And I'm not saying you have to attack people, but there were a couple of things that Tucker Carlson said there that I feel like Saagar could have pushed back on, but he doesn't seem to want to attack people. But the thing is that we cannot sit up here and pretend like color isn't a thing. It is a thing. And I think, see, people like Tucker and Saagar, like they want this world to like, we don't need to have DEI. We don't need to have any of these things. Everybody's just a human being and we can all just get along and support each other. But that's not the reality. The reality is this country is still very segregated. May not necessarily be so by law as it was in Jim Crow South, but it's still very much segregated by choice. But people like Tucker and Saagar want you to pretend that color isn't an issue. If color and race wasn't an issue, people wouldn't segregate by choice. So these are things that they need to understand. You can watch the whole interview on Breaking Points. Tucker sounds off on Ben Shapiro, Israel, free speech, and UFOs, etc. You can watch the full interview there. But I definitely think there were some moments where I feel like Saagar should have stepped in. That's my take on that. I agree with him in reference to what he was saying about the censorship. But it was also kind of funny because wanting to silence DEI is also kind of like censorship. Very interesting. All right. Thank you for the super chat, Penny Arcos. Pro fetus, procreate, but Palestine, ? Someone mentioned that on Twitter. Someone had mentioned, they were like, what about all the people that are pro-life? How do they feel about what's happening to the kids in Palestine? Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Those HSBUs ought to be ashamed, taking in Ukrainians after how they treat Black people. Yet Ivy League must be forced to consider Black people. Thank you so much for that. And Danny said, if color weren't a problem, Wells Fargo wouldn't have been caught calling Black people mud people when giving them junk mortgages. Exactly. I don't know why people don't push back on this guy, man. I think it's just because they really want to continue to have him come back on their show. I don't know. I don't know if it's because they're friends with him or whatever, but just because he may be your friend or someone that you want to interview again, some of those talking points should have been pushed back on.